tell you a little bit about our mayor. First of all, on a personal note, I would like to mention that when I first came to the community, one of the first people to put their hand out and say, "Welcome to the community, Bill, come be a part of us," was John Statton. And at that time, of course, he was the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the reasons I'm standing up here today. So I have to thank him personally for that. Back in 1997, John Statton ran for city council in Cupertino and was elected in 1997. He was that year the top vote getter among all of the candidates. Currently, of course, he is serving on the city council in the capacity of mayor. And the fact that John was a top vote getter shouldn't really come as a surprise to those of us who know him. John's career has had a theme of community service. He was a political science and public service major, and he graduated from UC Davis. He went on to be selected for a prestigious California State Assembly Fellowship, and he was later hired by the Assembly Office of Research, which sounds interesting, I'm sure. While there, he directed the Computer Literacy and Workforce Needs Project, which resulted in the passage of a blueprint for computer education in California's K-8 schools. Very important project looking towards our future. In 1984, John joined Apple Computer, and he worked with Apple as their community affairs department. In 1993, John came to the Cupertino Chamber of Commerce as executive director, and under his leadership, the chamber became a very active participant in the community and began getting involved in things like economic development and other very wide-ranging issues in the community. While he was at the chamber, as if he didn't have enough to do, he started attending law school, and he graduated from the University of Santa Clara School of Law with a certificate in high technology law. He passed the state bar in 1997 and is currently House Counsel for Active Software in Santa Clara. And of course, as we all know, most recently, John was elected as mayor in November 1999 by his fellow council members, and he will be continuing in that role for this year. Without any other discussion of John, I would like to introduce Mayor John Statton and his State of the City address.
Good afternoon. Before I begin, I got a happy announcement and I've got a sad announcement to make. The happy announcement today is that we are very honored today to have the presence of former Mayor Wally Dean with us, and I'd like us all to say, welcome Wally, and thank you very much for coming. That was the good news. The sad news, unfortunately, is that this last weekend, this community lost one of our longtime activists, somebody that has been very near and dear to many of us, and somebody that's been a part of the fabric of this town for many years. That person is Carol McDowell. And Carol is no longer with us, and I'd like just, if we could, to take a very brief moment of silence and reflect upon what she's given back to all of us throughout her years of service to our community. And so if you'd join me in that moment, please. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you here today. You are this community's leadership. From your hearts and minds, we are building this city. So, if you'll indulge me for a second, I'd like everyone to stand and say hello to somebody you don't know. Just reach over and shake a stranger's hand. Give them a big hello. Take 10 seconds to greet another community leader. Okay, thank you. Please sit down. It's a tough crew once you get them wound up. You just experienced what almost every third person in our city would like to share: more contact with their neighbors, enjoying a greater sense of community. At its base, community is one person helping another standing with another. But if we don't know each other, we can't work together to build a community. We are all responsible for how it turns out. We are all in this together. Today, I want to offer a blueprint for building a strong sense of local community. Today, I want to talk about the role of business, government, and citizenship within that blueprint. Something very special happened at midnight New Year's Eve. Across this planet, people celebrated in a global circle of fireworks. Auckland, Tokyo, Sydney, Moscow, Paris, and London, New York, and San Francisco. It flashed on our TV screens, so we each felt a little like we were there. A friend of mine got up at 4 a.m. to start watching. Individual cities' local hoopla merged into what was the first global celebration that I can remember. And this was a perfect example of the global, local spectrum that we are all embracing today. You know, the stealthy rise of globalism has been one of the major changes shaping our world over the last 20 years. CNN, the European Union, NAFTA and the internet, the fall of the wall and the rise of democracy, Hollywood and Coca-Cola, planetary economic integration ushered in by a wildfire spread of technology, markets, and capital. The World Trade Organization protest in Seattle showed it is now global economic relationships, shaping local, economic, environmental, and social impacts. We like to talk about how we're inventing the future here in this valley. Indeed, our major corporations have been the foundation for much of the internationalization underlying our time. Apple launched the personal computer industry on a worldwide basis. Tandem enabled vast ATM networks stretching across continents. And HP's 4,000 local employees are part of 100,000 brother workers in dozens of countries. Our jobs are local, but our vision is global. And when it comes to changing the world, Cupertino has given at the office. We are at the epicenter of globalism's magic carpet ride, the internet. Driving through downtown San Jose the other night, all I saw were .com billboards. Nods, yes. Ordering your groceries, delivering by web van. Lonely? Point your browser at matchmaker.com. Make a bid for those concert tickets on eBay. And if you can avoid all the .com fatigue, this can be pretty heady stuff. But something funny happened on the way to the future. While we are at the vanguard of global change, we've allowed its worst aspects to do violence with our communities. Our collective sense of community has suffered in the face of brutal commutes, channel surfing evenings away, and getting to work early and leaving late, and a pervasive feeling that we don't even have time to get to know our neighbors. A good sense of community can balance the more negative aspects of globalism. We inherently know this, and we long for a sense of community. And perhaps this comes from 1,000 generations of tribal culture. And just like those cities on New Year's Eve who with fireworks proclaimed their local roles in the global event, Cupertino's had its own experience with strengthening its sense of community with skyrockets. You know, how do you build a sense of community to balance globalism? How do you put a sense of place in a town where adjacent cities all blend into one another? One way is to provide a common shared experience for your residents. I like to call this fairs, festivals, and the good old 4th of July. Many of you remember when a group of citizens led by Nicole Lee and Barbara Rogers wanted to bring back the 4th of July fireworks. The city had stopped sponsoring the show because of last recession's budget cuts, and these citizens were unstoppable. They raised money from corporations and small businesses, they got volunteers and put on fundraising activities, and they organized the return of what's been a very welcome addition to our city. And most importantly, they added a very missing element to our sense of common identity. You know, we don't often talk about the true purpose of a city. It's not the streets and parks. It's more than great law enforcement and fire protection. All these things are important elements, but they are not why we gather together in cities. The purpose of having a city is to create a community, to unite the people who live together in a common place and time. This country's heritage is a great ability to fashion a sense of community out of the people and resources you have in your time. From our earliest days, people drawn to become Americans like to meet together and form associations. On our coinage is the phrase, e pluribus unum, of many, one. It reflects that we do better in this country, better than any place else, is get along with our neighbors, to fashion communities out of the diversity of interest that are found in a given geographical space at a given moment in time. Look around. We are a subculture society. Church member, band parent, small business owner, neighbor, Rotary Club member, or local corporate worker, divided in our interest as much by our ethnicity or gender, the challenge of creating a real community is to be able to accommodate these different interests, to provide a safe and fertile environment to coexist, to get along with each other and provide for the common good. It's that simple. We get so caught up in the traditional paradigm of what a city is that we ignore the fact that what's important is not building a great physical infrastructure, although I admit I occasionally covet a Los Gatos-like downtown. Instead, a great community is made by something much more intangible. It's a sense in your heart. When you feel part of something, when you feel connected to others, you're experiencing the sense of community. It's a feeling that you should all expect in a place you call home. And you know something? Either we get very good at this talent, this ability to create neighbors out of strangers, or we backslide. And at the far end of backsliding lies Bosnia. Look at Sarajevo, a modern host city for the Winter Olympics a few short years ago, and now torn apart in ethnic cleansing and neighborhood war. We are community stakeholders in the most personal way possible. We should look to our local government to provide the framework, the foundation for our community building efforts. The other day, I was counting up the number of businesses, of community building businesses that the city's involved in. And you may not be surprised, but the count hit 11. Let me just read them off real quick. It's arts and culture, city operations, neighborhood building, economic development, environment, housing, information infrastructure, parks and recreation, public safety, social services, and transportation. Last Friday, the council met to lay out our agenda in each of these areas. We considered the goals that each city commission proposed, and I walked away from that meeting with a deep respect for the caring and the sharing that each of my fellow council members has for this town. I'm also happy to report that while we each have our own ideas, we're also developing a common vision. Ladies and gentlemen, the varsity team today, Vice Mayor Sandy James, please stand and take a bow again. Councilmember Don Burnett, Councilmember Michael Chang, Councilmember Richard Lowenthal. Now I was thinking about making one of those 4-hour Fidel Castro-type speeches, and if I was going to discuss each of the goals we have set to build this community, it would take that long. So let me hit on a few to give you a little bit of a flavor. I'm willing to bet that each of you here today are involved in other groups besides Rotary and the Chamber. I'm also willing to bet that you know other leaders in our community, coaches of youth sports teams, heads of homeowners associations, and other service groups such as Quota, Optimist, and Lions. We are going to assemble the collective leadership of this community in the first Community Congress. We are going to ask our most active citizens to come together one weekend and help address the issues facing our city. This will be modeled after the very successful 5 C's community forums on diversity. We want to see the community reasoning together and neighbors working together on the big picture issues such as youth, housing, and transportation. You know, if we all feel like our cities are becoming more dense, it's because we're now in the center of one of the fastest growing urban areas on the planet. We are suburb no longer, and we should be looking at ourselves as a uniquely special city. Our challenge is to harness increased density so we do not lose our quality of life. We have 3 big developments coming up that will significantly shape our town and ultimately shape who we are as a community. They are Valco, the city center, and the Compact property. Valco is poised to either redevelop into a mall where Cupertino will shop first or sink slowly beneath the retail waves. We are keeping a very close eye on what's happening. We've made a commitment to establish a redevelopment agency to give the city greater power over Valco's future. Until then, we are at the mercy of the market. This year, we'll see the groundbreaking of the final phase of City Center's development with the addition of a landmark hotel, apartment complex and park. The completion of this corner has been a long-held city goal, and we're going to be finishing it off in style. And I believe it was once Don Allen who said that the development fights over the last few acres are always the biggest. And we are especially challenged over the compact property on the east end of town. It is the final 18 acres of undeveloped commercial land. And this council has made a commitment to make sure this development is done in a manner that benefits not only the landowner, but the entire community. We believe the end product will be significantly more innovative than the sketches proposed to date. But with the increased density, we also need to offer more opportunities for people to find open space. And the importance of getting our urban trail network developed is front and center. The Stevens Creek Trail is our first target for getting a plan and budget in place this year. Eventually, you'll be able to take this trail from the Stevens Creek Dam all the way to the bay. We've also decided that it's past time to offer our kids a skateboard park. Staff is being directed to find a way of breaking ground on this by the end of the year. Additionally, in the areas of environmental local stewardship, we'll be undertaking a master planning effort for the space between McClellan Road to Stevens Creek Boulevard. The uses currently encompass a golf course, a 5-acre orchard, Blackberry Farm, and McClellan Ranch Park. This area has citywide significance, and we hope that people from all over town will turn out and add their creativity to the plan. You know, housing, especially affordable housing, is not a problem that's going to disappear on this council's watch. But we are committed to see CCS be successful in its efforts to construct 24 units of affordable housing adjacent to the fire station. We all should be concerned that our teachers, public safety officers, and city employees cannot afford to live in the city that they serve. And we need to squarely deal with the density of housing along our traffic corridors if we're ever going to make it economically viable to extend light rail to Cupertino. Transportation is on the council's mind in a major way. We're going to be looking at traffic calming measures across the city, and we're also in the process of examining how we can create a more pedestrian-friendly town. And finally, we're going to start to overhaul the congestion around school sites in the mornings and the afternoons, which is a few people like that. This is good news. You know, when it comes to the topic of public safety, what can I say except that on behalf of the council and a very grateful community, we really appreciate the job that our firefighters and sheriffs do for this town. And I've got to relate a story that happened this last night before Christmas. I was driving home, was at the corner of Rodriguez and Blaney. A woman was driving through the intersection without her lights on, and an officer was going in the other direction. He turned on his light and they stopped. He tried to tell her to turn on her lights, but she did not speak English well and could not understand what he was saying. It was pretty obviously frustrating for both of them. Finally, the officer reached in and simply turned on the lights. The woman's face lit up with a big smile of understanding and happiness, and he wished her a pleasant evening. And for me, this was a very small example of how the folks we entrust with the public safety of our city do their jobs with caring and professionalism. Our city staff shares this same caring and professionalism, and unfortunately, we're going to be losing a number of valued senior members this year, people who have literally shaped this town for the better. Don Brown, who is widely acknowledged to be simply the best city manager in the West. And our ever-inventive Public Works Director, Bert Viskovich, have both announced they'll be retiring. Don and Bert, please stand and take a bow. Beyond the role of the city, we need to look at the social compact between citizens and community. What is expected from each party? Because without active citizens, there is no sense of community. And I would suggest there are two duties of citizenship that we should be discussing more openly: to get to know your neighbor and to participate. To acknowledge the hard work of many here, I'd like to add the duty of service above self, but I'm not greedy, and so I'm going to stick with these two simple duties: knowledge and participation. Show up and play. Think about it. It's your duty to get to know your neighbor, to do more than just wave when you leave the house in the morning. When neighbors know each other, magical stuff starts to happen. Houses are protected, the elderly get visited, kids get watched over, emergencies get handled, and community is built. participation that provides the Army for community building. It's heading a Y Indian guide group, coaching soccer, being a band parent, helping out at church, joining Rotary in the Chamber, and doing the hundreds of thousands of hours of volunteer work it takes to make this community a great place. Each of us in this room shows up and plays. But because we are leaders in this town, we have the added responsibility to spread the word to our neighbors. Each of us needs to be an evangelist for community. I want to take a little time and talk about the role of business in building our city. Our local business people, all of you assembled here today, have a strong understanding of the covenant between business and the town. You live the ups and downs of this community every day. You are tied to its residents as your customers. You are the ones who make constant small donations of goods and service, time and talent to support the good works of this city. And by the way, it's not too late to talk to Jim Walker about donating an item to the Rotary Crowd Feed silent auction coming up. And brothers and sisters, I would be shirking my civic duty if I did not point out that the Chamber is the single best vehicle for business participation in civic affairs. Because you are so present in this community, you get the relationship between your business and the health of the town a lot better, unfortunately, than your corporate cousins do. There is a split in this valley, a rift between the storefront and technology crowds. A recent San Jose Mercury poll found those of you working outside of technology are much more likely to feel a sense of connection to your neighborhoods and local cities. For high-tech workers, corporate life is replacing traditional community. Now, some of this is the natural result of globalism. The pace of corporate life is demanding. Almost 70% of us agree that people in Silicon Valley seem to lead a more frenzied life than in other places. And that's one reason why we don't see a lot of participation from the corporate sector in Rotary and service clubs. The frenzy of corporate life, with its focus on global sales, gives a perspective that leaves little time to consider and to respond to the needs of the community in the same way that smaller, more locally oriented businesses do. We have historically had a very positive relationship with our major local corporations. It stemmed in part from their founders' strong local ties. These were leaders who encouraged their companies to be active locally. A great example of this is the HP Way that got outstanding citizens like Orrin Mahoney and Mike Glane active in our town. But buyouts have shifted control to distant corporate boardrooms, and frenzied times have caused others to refocus on global rather than the local. This corporate isolationism from local community leads to a more transactional relationship with the city. Too often, the only time City Hall can get the attention of our major corporations is when they wish to develop land. Well, the easy development has all been done. We are in an intensification phase of land use. The only way this community will be willing to entertain the thought of additional development is if our local companies are perceived to be so valuable that we will take on the burdens of additional growth. You know, we're proud to be host to some of the finest corporations in the world, and we're going to be looking forward to working with them to redefine local corporate citizenship. You know, call it enlightened self-interest, but Hanson Cement seems to get it. They have active local representatives, they publish a community newsletter, they give tours, they participate in festivals, they donate to the Rotary Golf Tournament and help raise money for YMCA vans. Their volunteers are everywhere, and they have sustained this effort for many, many years. We need a similar level of engagement from all of our corporate community. We need you to show up and play. With all this talk about community, I don't want to miss one of the biggest community building efforts currently underway, the vote on a new library. Thank you. Now, what I have to say here is my own personal opinion, but we have almost loved the current library to death. It is time to rebuild it so we can keep on loving it for another generation. In a town that has no real downtown, the library plays an important role beyond spreading literacy and ideas. It knits us together as a community. And I don't suspect that many of you get the chance to go visit the library after school very often, but it plays a very important role in giving our kids a place to go when moms and dads are working late. Building a first-rate library is possible if we have the desire to reach for something more than the crowded building we currently share. And I want to applaud the efforts of Steve Andrews, Dorothy Stowe, and the other members of the Measure A campaign. And I want to ask for each of you for your support for this advisory measure. If we can't take on this major project during the best of economic times, then when will we ever? In closing, I've tried to think about how best to mark the millennium. What could Cupertino do that would be a small contribution to the global culture we are creating, and that would also express the uniqueness of our town? And I was struck by the idea of a time capsule, but not one to fill and bury in the ground. Instead, a digital time capsule, one that we can share with the planet. We are going to record the life of our community for this entire year and post it on the internet for the globe to see. Succeeding generations will be able to look back and see who we were and how we worked together to make Cupertino a vibrant place. Throughout this year, we'll be asking people and organizations to contribute their family histories and their group's pictures. We'll also digitize audio and video recordings of local events. And together, we're going to create a community memory of this year. We are gathered here today because we are the people responsible for the stewardship of this town. In part, I'd like to think that you're here because you innately realize that in the face of sweeping globalism, it's up to us and our neighbors to continue to make this a great place to live. It's up to us to use our time together in this place to craft a community. And my service as mayor is dedicated to this goal, and I'd like to ask God to bless each of you and your continued good works that you do. And thank you for coming, and have a great afternoon.